All right. Hopefully everybody can hear me out there. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 2023 Utility Mapping and Asset Management event hosted by Connect Me and sponsored by Bad Elf LLC and ProStar GeoCorp. We have an exciting event planned today discussing the importance of high accuracy field data collection, specifically for utility mapping, asset management, and state federal governments. Today, we're going to be discussing SUE, or Subsurface Utility Engineering, and some of the most recent ASCE, or the American Society of Civil Engineers, standards 38 and 75, and how those standards implicate in today's modern kind of AEC asset management right-of-way world. Before we get started, however, I want to quickly run a poll and see where everybody is from. So on your screen here in just a moment, you should see a demographic poll. We'd love to hear where you're from, what sector geographically, but also what you are working in. So if you wouldn't mind, just take a moment, fill out whether you're in transportation or maybe your GIS, Geographic Information Systems / geospatial. Perhaps you're in public works or SLG, state and local government, mapping and surveying, more on the geodetic land surveying side, maybe remote sensing, drones, LiDAR, INSAR, utilities, maybe it's wet or dry, perhaps it's telecom or electric, maybe you're in engineering, AEC, architectural engineering, consulting, or contracting, construction, or maybe something completely off-grid and it's not one of those options. You could also select other. And then let us know where you're from. We'd love to see, we've been having a ton of participants from all of our global neighbors. And so it's great to see people from all over the world taking interest in the importance of utility mapping and asset management. So as that poll is wrapping up here, I just want to do a quick introduction. My name is Dr. Nicholas Smolowski. I'm the Geospatial Solutions Director for Bad Elf and your unofficial MC for this event. You'll hear from me a little bit later. Here in just a moment, we're going to be opening up with a presentation from Paige Tucker from ProStar, then Rodney Carlson from the government, and then I'll be following up with a solutions discussion, and we will round out the event with a cool, fun, and hopefully informative question and answer. So at any point during this, if you have any questions, please make sure to send that into the Q&A or chat. We'll make sure to pick that up, and at the end, we will address any of the questions that you may have. We are recording this event, and we will be posting this to all of the different social media channels, etc. afterwards. And so if you weren't able to make it today, you can, or you had to leave early, you can always come back later. Okay, so again, go ahead and fill out that poll. We're going to wrap that up in just the next couple seconds, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. So Paige, if you don't mind, if you could go ahead and turn on your camera, I'll pass the torch. You're up next. I'm excited to hear about what you got. And I will just say this one last thing. You could probably see the polls, but we've got a pretty wide distribution of people for listening today, Paige. So I'm excited to see how you're going to speak to all the transportation and GIS people. State and local government seems to be taking the cake at 23%, and predominantly most of the people coming from North America. So without further ado, Paige, take it away.
Thank you very much. And now I'll share my screen. So thank you for that introduction, and thank you for everybody for joining the webinar. My discussion today is based on the digital transformation of the utility industry. And there's several tailwinds that are driving this transformation, including advancements in modern technology, as well as new guidelines and standards that are being introduced. But maybe more importantly, early adoption from some of the largest companies in the world, as well as government agencies. When we talk about infrastructure, most people think of our roads and our bridges and our highways as a result of what I call a lot of bantering that has been coming out of the White House over the last couple of years. And as a result of that, we had a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that was passed, which was designed to address the dilapidated roads and bridges and highways that we have that crisscross our nation that are becoming in serious need of repair and replacement. But what a lot of people don't think about is a whole nother infrastructure that's very critical to our economy, which is the buried infrastructure comprised of our utilities and our pipelines. Just to put things into perspective, there's about 2.5 million miles of paved roads in the United States, which pales in comparison to the 35 million miles of underground pipelines and utilities, which are also becoming dilapidated and in serious need of repair and replacement. The challenge is that we can't see them. So often when there is some sort of damage or they need to be repaired or replaced, it's often too late, whereas you can see where there are damages on our above ground infrastructure. Both of these infrastructures are connected. You can't work on one without impacting the other. And there's several hundreds of billions of dollars that are specifically earmarked to improve our roads, our bridges, our highways, but also to repair and replace our water systems, our sewage systems, and to expand on our broadband network. And if we don't know the precise location of where these utilities and pipelines are located, and we do all of this construction, there's a high probability that we're going to significantly see an increase in the amount of damages that are incurred during construction. I would argue that we could see hundreds of billions of dollars worth of damages if we're not able to identify the precise location of where these utilities and pipelines are buried. This is what it looks like if I remove the pavement in any major city in the United States, Canada, or abroad. I refer to it as a spaghetti bowl of utilities and pipelines that have been haphazardly placed into the ground over the past 100 years. In fact, the majority of our utilities and pipelines were put into the ground between 50 to 100 years ago, well before we had any type of oversight or regulations, and no one was really concerned about where these utilities and pipelines were going into the ground. In addition, they were never intended to support the level of population growth that this country has experienced. All the industries that are impacted by the subsurface infrastructure include construction, Department of Transportation, oil and gas, engineering and surveying, railway, one call, utilities, as well as municipalities. 500,000 times a year, a utility or pipeline is hit during construction. That equates to every minute of every working day. And when you hit a utility or pipeline, some bad things can happen. You could have serious flooding, you could have traffic delays for several hours, businesses could be interrupted, we could have dangerous petroleum products that are seeping into our water systems. Or if you hit a high pressure gas line, there's a high probability that you're going to have an explosion. And when you do, serious injuries are incurred by either the public, the worker, or in some cases, you could have loss of life. And I would actually argue that the loss of life scenario is happening far too often, and that number is only increasing every year. It's estimated that we spend over $10 billion every year trying to identify where these utilities and pipelines are located. And yet it's estimated we have over $30 billion worth of damages to our economy. So whatever we're doing, obviously, it's not very effective. Part of the problem is, as I mentioned, that 50 to 100 years ago, there was very little oversight or regulations or compliance as far as where these utilities and pipelines were being placed into the ground. What might surprise you is over the last 50 years, including today, the way that we identify and map where these utilities are located is on paper maps. These are called as-built drawings. These are the original planning and design drawings on how these utilities and pipelines were intended to go into the ground. And yet how you plan for them to go into the ground and how they actually go into the ground is two different case scenarios, and could be for several good reasons. The ground conditions could be too harsh. There's obstacles that were in the way that were unknown at the time that they were planning and designing, as well as A lot of times when they're putting the utilities and pipelines into the ground, the right of way that they have permission to place them in is over congested with existing utilities or pipelines. So they might install them 3 or 4 feet, away from where they have permission, or sometimes even on the other side of the road. Then they get buried, then they get paved over top. And then when the regulators come in and take a look at where they were buried, as long as they're close enough to these original planning and design drawings, they sign off on them, which creates a problem because it means that they're inaccurate by nature. Another problem plaguing the industry is a business practice that's been well entrenched for over 30 years, is how we actually identify the location of where utilities and pipelines are buried. Every state has an 811 center, and you're required by law to notify the center where you're going to do construction that will require digging activities. As best as they can, they take all the information that's been provided to them by the utility and pipeline companies and try and determine who's going to be impacted by that construction. Then they notify the utility and pipeline companies that they have to come out and mark where the utilities and pipelines are buried. Quite often, they send out these contract locators that use what's called an electromagnetic cable and pipe locating device, which the majority of the time will locate where a utility or pipeline is located. But the problem is they use a spray paint can to mark on the ground where that utility is located. At best, it's accurate to about 1 meter, just based on human error. In addition to that, there's no way of knowing if they located the correct utility line. Quite often you can mistake a fiber optic line for a power line. And in addition to that, there's no way of knowing if they actually located the line at all. The construction companies and the engineering firms and the excavators that take on all the liability have gotten to the point where they don't trust these paint marks. So quite often what they'll do is they'll send in what's called a hydrovac truck. The hydrovac truck is designed to drill a hole over top of where the paint mark is and then suck all the dirt out through that giant vacuum system in an attempt to expose that utility line or pipeline and verify that that paint mark was actually correct. If they don't find it, they'll move it over a couple feet and they'll drill another hole in the ground. And they'll continue to do this process until they can actually expose where that utility or pipeline is. Why do they do that? Because the risk and liability, for example, of hitting a high pressure gas line, a major oil line or petroleum line, or fiber optic line is far too risky. The problem with this process, it's very onerous, very time consuming, and very costly. In addition to that, here's the workflow process and business practices associated to how the data is managed. And again, well entrenched in the construction industry for decades. They'll send the locators out to locate where the utility or pipeline is and put a paint mark on the ground, or they'll send out the hydrovac truck to actually expose it. And they'll send an engineering and surveying crew out there to actually survey in the paint marks or the hole in the ground where they expose the utility. Then they'll upload the data onto a PC out in the field. Someone has to review and verify the data. Then it gets exported back to the office where it's imported into their system of record, which is either a CAD system or a GIS system. Once the data is finally qualified, then it's exported back out into the field where the field crews can utilize this information to make a more informed and intelligent business decision. On average, this takes up to 10 days. We've been told it can take more than 30 days. Now, with all the technology that's being embraced by other industries to significantly improve their workflow processes and business practices, you would think that the construction industry would also embrace technology, but they're known as a lagger. They're actually ranked number 50 in the world, which means they're also ripe for disruption, or what I call a transformation. This transformation, again, is being driven by several factors, but I think the most important component is advancements made in modern technology that includes cloud, mobile, and GPS. With this technology, you can now capture, record, and display the precise location of subsurface infrastructure, including utilities and pipelines. You can significantly improve the current workflow processes and business practices that are associated with construction and the management of this subsurface infrastructure. And then another driver is we're starting to see adoption by some of the largest construction companies in the world, as well as government agencies and leading subsurface utility engineering firms in the US. This is what it looks like. For example, we take the utility locate device, and instead of just putting a paint mark on the ground, through Bluetooth technology, we're pairing it to a mobile device, which can either be just your standard smartphone or a tablet, running software that is designed to capture this information. Then you pair it to a precision GPS receiver. For example, I'm showing a Bad Elf receiver here. So this is not the chip that's embedded in the mobile device, which will provide accuracy of about 3 to 5 meters. This is a third-party precision GPS receiver that is designed to provide centimeter accuracy. Once the data of where the utility and pipeline is captured onto the mobile device, that information then goes up to the cloud, where it's put through algorithms and post-data processing, and the information can be readily available to whoever needs it in the field or in the office in a matter of seconds. This image demonstrates what it looks like when they're capturing where the utility or pipeline is located using the electromagnetic cable and pipe locating device. But instead, again, of just putting a paint mark on the ground, we're pairing that locate device with a precision GPS receiver. And then we're digitally recording on the mobile device the precise location of where that utility is located, and we're mapping it on the mobile device. And in that little white box, we're capturing metadata that's available both from the GPS receiver and from the electromagnetic cable and pipe locating device that provides the accuracy and the confidence level of the data that's being captured. So for example, you can see in that little white box, it says what type of locate device were you using. In this case, it's an RD88 or 8100. How deep is the utility in the ground? The currency and the frequency will determine what type of utility it is. We can see what type of receiver type. If we scroll down, you'll see where it says vertical precision. It's 1.3 centimeters. How do we know that level of accuracy? Because in this case, there was 21 satellites that were in view. We capture which constellation they're located in. And we're also capturing what's called the NEMA string data. So this is the accuracy data that's provided from each satellite that goes right into the cloud. We're running it through algorithms and post-data processing and making that information, again, readily available in a matter of seconds. And this determines, again, what we call the quality level of the data, which includes the accuracy and the confidence level. We can also project their existing records out onto the mobile device so that the field operator can see where their existing records indicate where the utility or pipeline is located in comparison to where it's actually being located. At a click of a button, you can measure the discrepancy of the distance, and all of this can be viewed in real time from the office. So for example, you could have 25 field crews out collecting this information, and someone in the office can actually watch in real time the method by which they're collecting the data. They can see the discrepancy between where they're actually locating the utility or pipeline in comparison to where their existing records indicate where it's located. And then at a click of a button, they can export the data out from the mobile device back to the office, where it can be imported into their system of records so they can update their existing records. So for utility companies or pipeline companies or municipalities, this provides a tremendous amount of value. Also, when you're hydrovacing, if you're actually exposing where the utility or pipeline is located, you can simply place a pole on top of the utility or pipeline and then just click the mobile device running the data collection software. And as you can see, we have a Bad Elf receiver on top of the pole. This will capture the precise location of where that utility or pipeline is down to the centimeter. And then you can also capture additional information on the mobile device. So again, here's the precision and the pedigree. But for example, you could take a photo of where the original locate was, and then where you hydrovac, where you actually can see where the utility and pipelines are located. In a lot of states, they require that you do a sketch, but as opposed to doing it on a piece of paper, you can now do it digitally on the mobile device, right on the ortho imagery. And then provide that information again back to the office. Now, with cloud and mobile technologies, we can also integrate into existing systems of record. So as I mentioned, the 811 system, we can actually integrate into the 811 system. And what we can do is create digital forms. We can visualize, for example, where the one call ticket boundary area is. So I'll show you. This is the one call ticket boundary area. And because there's GPS built into the mobile devices, we have developed what we call geospatial intelligence, which means it knows where you're standing. So if you're standing within the boundary of the one call ticket area, and we've created a digital form, when you open the form up, it'll auto-populate with all of the data that's available from that one call ticket. So you don't have to fill in the information and be worried about maybe entering wrong information in, because we do what's called fat thumbing. We can also embed photos into the form. So you can take photos that are automatically embedded into the form, and you can make notes, and you don't have to type. You can use the voice to text technology that's available on all the smart devices. Again, you can do a sketch, and then all of this information can be provided back to the office, where a professional can look at this information and determine the quality level of this information without having to be out in the field. So through the technology and the devices and how the data is being collected, you don't have to have an engineer or surveyor out in the field. He can actually examine this information in the office and determine the quality level. In addition to that, as I mentioned, he can take a look at the information that's being provided from the field. So it's like he's out in the field. He can see all this information without having to do a field visit. And we also built directions. So we're utilizing other technologies like Google Directions. So if they have to send somebody back out in the field, for example, to take a look at a potential issue, then the mobile device will get them right back out in the field where that issue was. Even if it was reburied, it'll get them right over top of where the issue is, so that they can inspect it and obviously take action on it. So with the new technologies, the workflow process is pretty simple. You capture the data, goes up to the cloud, information is readily available to whoever needs it in a matter of seconds. Now, as I mentioned, one of the drivers in the digital transformation that I'm discussing is you need adoption, and you need adoption by companies and agencies that can actually influence the transformation. One of the first companies that was an early adopter of this technology is a company called Kiewit. They're one of the largest infrastructure construction companies in the world. And they placed these technologies on a project, which was a $5 billion expansion through Denver of a major portion of I-70, which is one of the busiest interstates in the United States. And they would have to identify where there were thousands of utilities and pipelines, because they were actually moving sections of the interstate and relocating subdivisions. They tested this technology for 1 year, and it was so successful that we were able to quantify and measure that we reduced utility strikes by over 97%, which is cost savings of tens of millions of dollars. Because the interstate is owned and managed by the Colorado Department of Transportation, they also tested the software. And because of the impact that it had, the state of Colorado actually mandated the software. So that means that every utility company, pipeline company, municipality, construction company, they have to use this type of mobile and cloud and GPS technologies to determine the precise location of where a utility or pipeline is located on the state right away, and then provide that information back to the state. So then what we did is we took it out to some of the largest subsurface utility engineering firms in the world, including KCI, which is a US-based company. T2 is based out of Canada, but they also have several offices in the United States. And Utility Mapping, which is one of the largest subsurface utility engineering firms in Australia, in order for them to implement it, test it, and then provide back to us the features that they felt that we would have to add into the system to meet their specific workflow and business practices. And then what we've seen over the last 12 months is adoption by multiple companies in multiple verticals. including even mining companies, heavy highway construction companies, municipalities. So that's why I say we're on this verge or precipice of a digital transformation, just because of the amount of adoption that we're now realizing in multiple verticals. We're also seeing adoption and integration with some of the largest manufacturers of GPS equipment, including Bad Elf, Trimble, Emlet, and Juniper Systems, as well as the manufacturers of the electromagnetic cable and pipe locating devices, including Vivex, radio detection, Subsite, and 3M, to mention a few. The last thing I want to discuss, and maybe the most important, it was something that Nicholas alluded to, is we're also starting to see changes in guidelines and standards by agencies that include the American Society for Civil Engineers. So the last time that the American Society for Civil Engineers published their standards and guidelines was 20 years ago. As a result, they were called 3802 and 7502. And the new standards are 3822 and 7522, because these new standards came out and were published on July 20th of 2022. Historically, you could go out and put a paint mark on the ground, which was an indication of where a utility or pipeline was buried, and then you could survey that paint mark in, upload that information into a GIS or CAD system, and it was considered survey quality of where a utility or pipeline was located. Well, they've changed that now. A paint mark is basically just a paint mark. It's no longer an indication of where a utility or pipeline is located. And if you go survey the paint mark in, it certainly is not recognized as survey grade quality of where a utility or pipeline is located. What they want to see, and it's based on the advancements of these new technologies, is they want to see the precision and the pedigree. In other words, the method by which that utility or pipeline was located, and also the geophysical evidence. And then also they want to see photos taken that indicate how it was located, where it was located, and in addition to that, as I mentioned, the sketch. So as a result of all of these different tailwinds, which includes, as I mentioned, advancements in technology, including mobile cloud, GPS. Also, we're starting to see changes in the new guidelines and standards from very well-respected agencies like the American Society for Civil Engineers, as well as the early adoption of these technologies by some of the largest construction companies in North America and around the world, subsurface utility engineering firms, as well as government agencies, is why with a high level of confidence, I can say that the digital transformation is here, and you either lead, you follow, or you fall behind. That concludes my presentation, and I would like to turn it over now to Rodney Carlson, who is Geospatial Data Analytics Manager.
Thank you, Paige. Welcome, my name is Rodney Carlson, and I am a Geospatial Data Analytics Manager for a federal agency. And this presentation comes from how do you actually define some of the variables, the meaning behind the variables, and how do we actually get there? And the first two you always have to define when you're dealing with any sort of spatial quantification is accuracy and then precision. Accuracy is the degree to which the result of the measurement, calculation, or specification conforms to the correct value or standard. As Paige alluded to, the standards have been recently updated, and with that, does our current or older data sets actually conform to that newer corrected value or standard? Then precision is a refinement in a measurement, calculation, or specification that is actually presented by the number of digits given. And again, compare it with the accuracy. So knowing what your data is at, are you able to say your data is actually accurate or is it precise? And with either, you have to know how they work together. With that, developed a formula and a chart that actually describes based on how many number of decimal places you use, the level of decimal degrees, the level in degrees, minutes, and seconds, as I was saying, how does accuracy and precision work together? Knowing your decimal places, decimal degrees, degrees, minutes, seconds, all standard terms we use in surveying, civil engineering, and in Cartesian coordinates, those types of things. And the relative object scale that you're at when you're being measured at each one of these decimal places. As your precision goes up in the number of in decimal places you're using in decimal degrees, notice the limitations at where you're landing at. In most cases, most municipalities actually want to see a minimum of 4 decimal places. Well, that gets you to street level and large buildings. In practical application, 6 decimal places is most likely where most people have what they think is reasonable control of their area. The issue becomes, what is the actual scale? So we start getting into that 7th decimal place, which is the practical limit of what most modern technologies are at for commercial surveying. That is sub-meter, technically centimeter, and in that phrase, it also depends on exactly where you're at in relationship to the equator. So the closer you're to the equator, the more variability there is, but the further you climb up towards the poles, the less variability there is. So you need to account for the differences of your localities and how that accuracy actually works with that precision. Accuracy is dependent on how well is that measurement being taken at that given time and moment. It's only a snapshot of that point in time. To where, like Paige was saying earlier, if you have to go back and retrace a set of line work and paint marks, they're more likely not going to be there. How are you going to retrace it? Well, you have your former work, but what is really the issue? What came up in one of a case study is that we had a plans reviewer going out and trying to define which is a 3-inch and a 6-inch pipe shotgun side by side in a public utilities easement, and they were trying to determine which pipe was which. Because one direction, the north-south direction, had the 3-inch pipe on the western side of the trench and the 6-inch pipe on the eastern. But as they made the 90-degree bend to shift directions to east and west, all of a sudden, the 6-inch pipe ended up on the south side and the 3-inch pipe on the north side. This was a issue where the pipes, when measured, accidentally had some geomagnetic interference, and it actually caused the issue because quality assurance and other aspects were not taken, that this plan was actually produced out with the pipes in the wrong direction going east and west when the survey was taken at the time. So understanding the main portions of it is that you can measure it, you can plan it, but are they making the desired outcomes? So with those desired outcomes is, who are the stakeholders? What are the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish? What are the behaviors that we can observe to show the outcomes are being accomplished? Well, in most cases, the stakeholders are the municipal governments. What are we trying to accomplish? Get our plans previewed and properly submitted to actually we can develop. What behaviors do observe that? Field verification, granting of approval, the ongoing as-built construction process, constantly keeping of notes in the field. What data can we validate for as observation? Well, most of this is all observation mode. We haven't gotten to the point to where the pipes lay themselves. We haven't gotten to the point to where it's all self-validated. So we have to make sure those measures that we are using are working properly. And that's where data, the accuracy and precision come involved. Because if you're the more refined and more robust that is, you can tell that your measures are working and you're able to follow the construction process through in a more accurate way. And you're not going back and having to do so much legwork and research on things that you already have accomplished. What measures will link well to the desired outcomes, and what is that purpose, and what will we propose to that purpose? And that again is you have accuracy, precise measurements from reliable network, reliable sources that have been quality controlled, quality assurance, and then also with a final review independent of yourself to have somebody else to see if can they interpret it. Can a layperson interpret that plan? So that's one of the people that really actually needs to validate those selected measure. Hand a plan off to someone that actually knows something about plans, but they are not the actual designer that gets a clean, fresh viewpoint of what that plan is doing. How is those measurements being displayed? And are they actually communicatable and actually being able to track that progress? So as Paige alluded to in his prior presentation, there are many different methods of data collection. And some do it by crowdsourcing, traditional land cadastral surveying, field collection, Bad Elk being one of them, machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence, object recognition. These are all new, fancy buzzwords that sometimes even based on the advancement of the technology, even it has its limitations. It has its precision limits. It has its accuracy limits. Define what they are and understand that you're going into this with those limitations in front of mind. And then the observation, which is the primary type, data collection with fields interested. Well, what types? Are you using a field book and sketches with it? Or are you using digital handheld platforms such as tablets and other things where you can actually sketch the farm in the field? Are you doing it in an online or offline hybrid type model? Our GIS field collector is a model of that. Is this project something newsworthy or a headline that will actually get you further along in the process? The biggest reason why we question that is because this gets to see how many eyeballs are on this project. And if there's more eyeballs on the project, there's more available sources of information, such as social media. A lot of people will love to complain about the negative of things before they'll even spend out an ounce of positives. Well, what kind of outcomes can you gain from something like that? Well, the accuracy and trying to be collecting it in an accurate manner, there's a lot of challenges. The data that is, you got outcomes, activities, and measures. The data that is usable to make data-driven decisions. So this is a key concept that a lot of newer companies are using, that data is driving the results, not necessarily emotions. Well, I feel like it's there, or I knew it was there. Does the data back it up? Does that valid collection actually provide that? And that's where your quality assurance comes in. And you need to measure the percentage of the data that passes the means test to be accepted into the data set. Is it something that actually says, yes, I can actually say that with 95% confidence, that is within the boundaries of what is acceptable for the data set overall? Second portion of it is data validated data by checking for inconsistent data. Well, that's where quality control comes in. And the control process is being able to maintain procedures for both during and after your data collection methods. So you have to remember that there's multiple phases to your data collection process. It can't just be going out, collecting it, post-processing it, running it up, and getting it into my database and calling it good. That's done. It doesn't always work that way because, well, somebody like Paige said, hey, he fat-fingered a pipe or a street name or an address or a definition in the data set. He got a T pipe instead of a 90-degree angle. You have all kinds of different things that may go wrong with the data that you need to make sure that you're actually accurate in those processes to follow that up. And then the last portion of it, like I was saying, ambiguous data. Data is this data easy to interpret and understand for reporting and analytics decision making? can I use that model and run it straight from beginning to end in a single phase and not have any questions that says, yes, I know that this is a 3-inch PVC pipe that is run 200 feet to the north, hits a 90-degree angle. It runs 400 feet to the west, but there's no other valves or anything along the line. So I don't know if I've actually maintained integrity of the pipe length and control. So there are ways to understand if your data is ambiguous. And is that known issue? Well, where are the valves? I've gone more than 150 feet based on my city criteria to allow me to not have a valve to help limit potential issues in service outages. So that's where you come in, and then we also like to say, can you get hung up on all these different terminologies? We also find that the things that are the easiest to define based on your user, will it help them understand it? And how will it make that data decision done? And the biggest portion of it is that the definition is the key thing, as I started out with. It's why it began with this presentation began with the two definitions, because that metric definition sets the expectation for the audience and the users to understand how they are going to interact with the data. What will the metric help us understand? Is this model in the data collection methods something that I can use over and over again? Or do I have to go back because I didn't use accurate enough precision or have good enough accuracy to use it over and over again? How it will support my data-driven decisions is that final outcome. Can I actually say, yes, without a doubt, this pipe runs 200 feet north, hits the 90-degree angle. I go 400 feet west, but I have two valves at the 150-foot intervals. That's taking the data source and collection approach. The baseline and understanding, am I meeting the standards? Am I communicating and reporting that approach that I am using these standards? And what are my potential barriers? Well, things happen with GPS, technology issues as we started out in this entire presentation where even the user can't get the button clicked that he thought they clicked. Things happen. So you got to make sure that you are understanding where the barriers are at and how they all work together. But the key important is iterate, iterate, iterate. You refine those selective metrics with the team and make sure they're all on board. And they test it by using meaningful, measurable, and movable definitive 3Ms. The meaningful is that it links to the desired outcomes and provides useful information to enable that decision making. It's measurable and it's quantifiable and objective because it's a part of the plan, so the data is available and can be collected in that cost-effective manner. Is surveying always cost-effective? Well, it's better than the alternative of hitting some pipes. Movable. Can the data be moved and compared to over time and depict trends? How often is that intersection I've been discussing been tore up, as Paige described in some of his earlier descriptions? How often are you trying to go through and do utility relocation because you didn't think of it well enough in the first place? And does it link into those inputs, and can they be controlled and adjusted for? The other examples are in movable models, because a lot of times surveyors will collect things in assumed coordinates because we just haven't resolved the datum yet. We haven't resolved where is it at in its coordinate space. We're not sure if the precision or accuracy is well enough, but we could go ahead and collect it in our 6th and 7th decimal place and say, all right, we can tie it in later. We know where our anchor points are at. They're a 3-inch brass disc, and for example, in the center of the intersection in downtown Phoenix. We know what we're tying to. How precise is the measurements even provided by the agency that's in charge of it. NGS and their data sheets are not completely up to date to the most modern precision standards, even for their own items. So making sure that we actually are adjusting as time goes on and make the notes. And when you have to move things around, that you are making reasonable, informed, data-driven decisions. And with that, I'd like to conclude and pass it back to the moderator or Nick. Actually, it's Nick next. Sorry about that, Nick, and his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rodney. I appreciate it. Good seeing you. That was really informative. Normally, when we talk about precision and accuracy, absolute accuracy, people kind of just blow by it. But that was really good. So let me go ahead and share my screen here to wrap up our presentations before we get to the actual Q&A panel discussion. Again, my name is Nick Smolofsky. I work with Bad Elf LLC. I'm the Geospatial Solutions Director and your unofficial MC for today. Great presentations from both Paige and Rodney. You could see both software, you saw hardware, policy, best management practices, and all of that just is music to my ears. Bad Elf, how we fit into all of this is we are a manufacturer of GPS or GNSS. We provide high accuracy data collection. So today, quickly, I want to introduce you to Bad Elf. I want to talk to you specifically about our high accuracy solution, the Flex. I'll talk a little bit about some advanced functionality that was briefly touched on earlier. We're going to talk a little bit about sector and industry placement and a few customer case studies. If you're unfamiliar with Bad Elf, like I said, we are a GNSS low-cost alternative brand to some of the major ones that you may be familiar with over the last few decades. We provide really powerful agnostic hardware for both GIS and survey professionals alike. When I say agnostic, we are able to connect to iOS, Android, Windows. We don't care what you Bluetooth connect to. You bring your own data collector to our device, so to speak, and then you can even pick your app of choice, like ProStar's PointMan, which is a great utility mapping /GIS/ surveying app. If you've asked where did we come from, about 13 years ago, Bad Elf got into the GPS space and aviation. No, we're not a startup company, and no, we don't create skateboards. We don't manufacture skateboards. We do GPS, and like I said, aviation to start. Then we jumped into the marine industry. In the center bottom of your screen, you can see one of our older plug-in GPS, perhaps you've used in the past for some type of recreational activity. We also have a line of what I affectionately call hockey puck units, which are in the 2 to 1 meter kind of GIS mapping, great for relocation, general navigation, if you're doing some type of sports, trail running, hunting, fishing, golfing, but also into that beginning level of GIS data collection. Rodney had a great slide up that talked about the different decimal places. Some of these lower end devices in terms of accuracy, but very, very affordable. They may be great to say map a larger object, but the moment you need to get into that high accuracy, especially talking about utilities to mitigate pipe strikes and things like that, you've got to really dive into a higher accuracy solution than that. That brings us to our most recent Bad Elf Flex, in which we provide that high accuracy solution to GIS, geospatial mapping, and land surveying. Before I go any further, I want to kind of give a graphical representation of what Rodney was speaking about on that spreadsheet. If you look at a common cul-de-sac in a North American community, especially in the Southwest, you can envision that cul-de-sac in your head, the size. And the Bad Elf receivers, our high accuracy receiver, that's that blue dot in the middle. That is a discrete location of a centimeter or better. That's what, unofficially we would like to call survey or engineering grade. That blue dot is really the type of accuracy you're going to need to create a digital twin, an accurate digital twin, a system of record that is going to be able to help your constituents and your team members and things like that. You can see the other concentric rings there, cell phone GPS, or what we call consumer GPS or GIS grade. But when we're talking about high-end, utilities and a right-of-way for asset management, most of the time we're talking about, fractions of an inch or centimeter or better. So the Bad Elf Flex I've alluded to a couple times, and you saw it in Paige's presentation as well. Just so everybody knows, Bad Elf and the Point Man app and ProStar, we have a great working relationship, and we are integrated in their application. And so we're part of the drop-down menu that you can select from a pre-established list of GNSS devices. Bad Elf Flex comes in 2 modes, standard and extreme. So we really make it flexible in terms of pricing and what you want to do with it. If you don't need a centimeter of accuracy, we can get you this single piece of hardware for a little bit cheaper, a little bit more affordable. If you ever need that higher accuracy on a pay-to-play kind of like during the day, maybe Monday through Thursday, you're just doing kind of GIS mapping, 1 meter's fine or sub-meter's fine. And then on a Friday, you need to tie into a benchmark or NGS monument, maybe set ground control to use a drone or LiDAR. You could use a token to engage that. And last but not least, we have our, fully extreme mode unlocked. So it's a fully survey grade rover all day, every day. We kind of call it the Swiss Army knife of GNSS because it is so flexible and it does so many different things. As I mentioned earlier, we're app agnostic. So some advanced functionality of the Bad Elf Flex, looking through the eyes of a cartoon elf. You can see here we have base rovers. So I mentioned 2 modes of the Bad Elf Flex, standard mode and extreme mode. When you're in the extreme mode, you can get RTK corrections via N-trip, or you can get RTK corrections via a localized base and rover setup with a UHF radio. What's neat about the Flex is no matter your circumstance, this one piece of hardware hits all the profiles of mapping needs, whether from GIS all the way to survey grade, and even off grid. If you're unable to connect to a VRS or RTK network, you can do a localized base and rover to have that high accuracy and precision. We're able to integrate right into lasers like rangefinders like LTIs, laser offsetting to do both vertical and horizontal offset measurements. This is especially good if you don't want to jump into a busy intersection or you need to collect, say, a utility that's above the ground. And then last but not least, we can provide highly accurate either RTK real-time data or post-process data for ground control. Same idea, not through the eyes or lens of a Bad Elf cartoon, but actual real life imagery of the different types of devices being used with the Bad Elf Flex. I want to throw out there that the Bad Elf Flex has also been integrated into several different types of devices, like ground penetrating radar or utility locators, like we discussed earlier. It is good to know that Bad Elf's SDK is available through GitHub. And so if you want to connect your own specialized device, no matter what it does or collects or observes, truthfully, you can really connect into the Bad Elf. We want this device to be utilized by everybody. This ground penetrating radar provides these, underground mapping. So looking for utilities. We're not going to get into the nuance of GPR in this discussion, but if you do have any questions about GPR locators, whether, it's a radiometric or using what we're talking about here, just reach out to us afterwards. We can certainly talk you through that. A couple case studies. WGI Group's one that we like to offer up. Not every company is as forthcoming of what they're doing in their operations, but WGI uses several Bad Elf devices throughout the United States. And you can see Paige earlier was discussing potholing in the lower left-hand corner. You can see the GPR device in the lower right-hand corner. You can see a point cloud from a drone or mobile mapping system in the top. But they utilize the Bad Elf equipment to collect data for these types of projects. They should also throw out there in their Colorado divisions and Colorado work, they also leverage the Point Man, ProStar's Point Man software. They often will take all of the data that they collect and throw it into GIS dashboards. This is that cloud component that was discussed earlier by Paige, but also by Rodney. This is where we disseminate data to the constituents and the team members and people that care about it. So live sort of real-time decision making, even pumping these data into actual deliverables, right? So kind of automating the process. We talked about fat fingering earlier and user error, right? We used to joke, I it's probably not politically correct anymore, but I used to call myself an ID10T error, but that's just a lame way to say a user error, right? But as we automate these things and these systems or technologies, as we enter this paradigm shift that Paige was mentioning, this geospatial moment, we're able to automate more things and have more confidence in these authoritative data. And these are being required, right? So we talked about the ASCE standards, and that's just in the United States, but in some regards, we are actually lagging behind other places in the United States, other places outside of the United States that have regulations for infrastructure. This is a cool case study where they've attached the Bad Elf Flex to do utility collection onto a sustainable, low energy e-bike, or perhaps you're attaching the Bad Elf Flex into doing core sampling to understand geological processes, or perhaps you're collecting data for your digital twin of a botanical garden because you have to manage thousands of specimens. As we talk about small, discrete specimens like cacti, having higher accuracy that works in diverse environmental conditions is important. Really bring truth to those hand-drawn maps you can see represented in the middle of the screen there. So that was just my quick solutions presentation, all about Bad Elf, right? I guess I would just end this portion of the discussion on, if you have any questions about Bad Elf or the Bad Elf Flex, you can reach out to me, nick@bad-elf.com, or you can put a question into the chat now. Just know that the Bad Elf Flex is flexible in price, it's flexible in accuracy, flexible in what you connect it to and how you operate it. So the app it's being utilized with, we'd love to see more and more people utilizing this type of technology, whether it's Bad Elf or not, to provide really good data so that generations to follow will not have all the issues that we have in the construction process today. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. I'd like to invite all of the panelists to come back, Rodney and Paige. Also, I don't know, Larry, if you're out there from Bad Elf, if you want to jump in, we're going to do a little question and answer. And I will just start kind of spitfiring them across the bow, and we can go from there. I know everybody's time is important, and so we're going to try to get through this Q&A period in about the next 15 minutes or so. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions, we can certainly attack those. So we've got a question from Robert, and I think this is going to be best served by Paige. If you could jump in. What measure of accuracy does the field utility locate device provide for the locate technician?
It's a great question. So the first company that's actually integrated a GPS GNSS receiver into the locate device is Vivex Metrotech. So in order to have the precise geospatial location of the data you're collecting on where the utility or pipeline is located, you have to integrate into some type of GPS receiver. So if it's just the GPS chip, as I mentioned, that's embedded in the mobile device, and as Nicholas alluded to, you're at best probably 3 to 5 meter accuracy if you're dependent on that chip embedded in the device. If you're using a precision GPS receiver, like the one that Nicholas presented, that's developed and manufactured by Bad Elf, then you can get down to the centimeter. So it's based on, obviously, your budget, what type of receiver you want, and what type of precision that receiver offers.
That's great. Thank you, Paige. All right. I've got one for Rodney because you talked so much about accuracy and precision. This was in the previous question or previous presentation, but I think you can answer it. We've got a question that says, not very clear how precision GPS helps to fill out metadata except for Latin long. I know, Rodney, you know about all the different data that the NEMA stream can hold and PDOP and things like that. So maybe you can talk a little bit about precision and why that's important metadata.
Yeah, for your metadata purposes, if you do not document it properly in that, you cannot actually reuse the data. So the purpose of metadata, as we say, is the data about the data. Baseline definition. Precision, within that, how precise, how confident can you think that the answers that you are giving them are replicatable, iteratable, reproducible, and can be trusted to be inaccurate in the precision set that you're using. The precision set is based on what are the objects are you trying to locate. Nick alluded to in his last portion of the presentation that the small cacti need a much higher precision and accuracy, both, to making sure that they're actually getting back to that endangered cacti. In that case, that one I think was actually an endangered one. And we also use that in a lot of our other federal partners. I can't discuss a lot of those things, but this is also a presentation that is brought out encompassing all of our federal agencies. So when you're interfacing with the federal agencies, that is one of the key things. We have standards and regs to go by.
Would it be safe to say that as a data analytics manager, you may look at the metadata attached to a lat, long, and elevation to determine if maybe that data are good? Like you could look at like the correction time or your RMS values, things like that. Is that fair?
Yeah, and we also look at the time stamping, how many iterations of the timestamp were included within the package. So if you are using 5 iterations on a single point and collected it over a 15-second period of time, we're able to see how the epochs are actually hitting. Are you within the actual geoid form? And sitting at the geoid level, are you actually correcting both your 2D and your 3D? Because you can't necessarily correct them both in the same iteration, or you don't really want to.
Oh, that's great. I think I heard you say epics. Maybe it was Ewoks. I'm not sure, but no, I'm just kidding. I might have been watching Star Wars this weekend. No, that was great.
Yeah. There you go.
All right. Thanks, Rodney. This one's going to be for Larry. Hey, Larry, does Bad Elf GNSS receivers work with the ESRI ArcGIS products? And similarly, maybe you could follow with that page what the connection with Esri and ProStar is.
Sure. Let's let Larry answer first based on the Bad Elf question.
So I'll go ahead and start with that. Thank you, Nick. So yes, we do work with all the Esri mobile apps. That would include Esri Field Maps, the Legacy Collector, Survey 123, and Quick Capture. And kind of a follow-up to the question before is the metadata that streams from our receiver is available to all the apps. So just as it's available to Pointman, it's available to the Esri apps as well. So all the information such as your dot values, satellite visibilities, what the lineage of the data that's being reported is available to all the apps. Paige,
okay,
would you like to take this?
To answer your question, and I like the word that Nicholas used, which was flexibility. So you can use our Pointman application as your system of record. So you can actually manage all of your assets in our system. But a lot of companies that we work with, which are very large organizations, are well entrenched, I would say, in their legacy system. So they're either using Esri, they might be using Bentley or Autodesk. So the way that we designed the system is that you can collect all the data out in the field utilizing our Pointman software, but the data will export literally in any format that's required to have it consumed into a legacy system that I mentioned could be Esri, Autodesk, Bentley. So we also work seamlessly with those other systems.
That's great. So basically, we all get along. This is wonderful. We've got a question. I actually can answer it. I'll save you a breath here, Paige, because I've used the Pointman software quite a bit. Scott asks, does Pointman have the ability to select the correct datum information? And yes, it does. And so in the Pointman app, you can actually set up your ntrip client to connect to your correct RTK. But then you have the ability, it has a complete kind of geodetic engine in it. And so you can pick your export coordinates, whether it's projected, if you're NAT 83, 2011, your datums from WGS 84, et cetera. So yes, ProStar is ready to go and do all of that type of data transformations that you would need to get it into the correct systems. Okay, let's see here. This one comes from Pam. Are you locating any site survey control so that the surveyor can tie together your data and the survey horizontal and vertical control? Maybe Paige, you can start. What are you seeing in today's climate of modern utility data collection?
So as you know, when we use this term subsurface utility engineering, which was a couple of years ago was kind of somewhat unheard of. Now it's common language, where a lot of companies and a lot of states and a lot of government agencies are starting to require that you utilize subsurface utility engineering business practices to collect the data. So as we've all alluded to, is the fact that you need the quality and the confidence level of the data, and you can go as far back as you want. As we mentioned, within the data, there's all different levels of attribute data, metadata that provides the quality and the confidence level that dictates just how accurate it is. But it's becoming much more prevalent in the industry. And then, as I mentioned, again, with the tailwinds and the drivers, you now have the American Society for Civil Engineers that are changing even their data standards and guidelines, which are all based on subsurface utility engineering, which again is the adoption of these modern technologies, which is based on cloud, of course, mobile and GPS technologies like what Bad Elf provides.
That's great. How about we'll go with Rodney next. I know Rodney's got a background in both land surveying and GIS. I like this. It's more of a comment, and maybe you can talk towards it, whether you agree or disagree.
Okay.
But there's a comment out there that says, quote unquote, GIS grade GPS accuracy. GIS data is in no way dependent on a specific level of positional accuracy. Do you agree or disagree? What are your thoughts on that?
It can be used in both fashions. So that is depending on the application. If you're using a proper application, then they have to coexist because the data is the data of the data. You have to accept it as that is. It's the method of the collections, and it's all GIS is a way to display a database of information. So if you're looking at a database of information, collecting the values, those values are going to actually spit out no matter what the GPS unit you use. It's going to all be dependent on those items. So if you have a GPS unit that only can get you to meter accuracy and precision, and you're expecting centimeter, it isn't going to happen, no matter if you collect for those extra decimals or not. So you have to remember, what is the platform? Yes, we use 8 decimal places in many federal applications. We are that precise when we're dealing with substrat and fault lines, especially in California, and utilities in that area, in those fault line areas. It is absolutely required. So yes, they have to be used.
Okay. All right. I appreciate your opinion. I've got one for Larry from Mustafa. And Mustafa asks, how will you solve basically, how would you capture precise data at a heavy trafficked road, intersection, street with this solution?
So I believe Nick made mention of a concept of offset capture, and that requires using a laser to offset the location. And so this has more application than simply just a heavy intersection. It applies to fundamentally any place that you can't readily access. So you might be at the side of a road looking into a ditch that you can't actually make a measurement of. There's no way to physically move the receiver there. You might be in an urban canyon for all that matter, or in a GPS denied situation. So the common mechanism for doing that is to place a GPS receiver in a most pristine, place where it has good sky visibility, where you can control the environment of the GNSS receiver and use the laser to offset your location or move the apparent location of where the point being recorded actually is.
Okay, great. That's a perfect answer. I guess I would just throw this in. It's like my gut reaction. One, just to throw it out there that if you are in a busy intersection, you may need to have active traffic control devices out there, and you may need to shut traffic down. And there are entire, I see Rodney shaking his head because I know Rodney in the past has dealt with this as well, but you have a whole set of engineering plans on traffic control. And if it's that bad, you need to mitigate the risk as best as possible. Yeah. The other thing I would just quickly mention is that there are many tools for the trade. Paige had actually shown in one of his original slides that it was a total station. So they're a traditional land surveying device, something we may call a gun. It, shoots the laser. Sometimes you need to use a total station to collect the geospatial data, where a GNSS receiver collecting radio signals from space just ain't gonna cut it. So just throwing it out there, make sure you're staying safe out there, and then use the right tool for the right trade. I'm going to throw this up
to that. Well,
Yeah.
I'd like to add to that. In using EDM, which is what's the traditional name for your total station, those also have a way of you can get actually more accurate results. If you're using your Peanut Prism, you're actually using the right type of technology to back it up, so that if you're dealing with those high concentrated, high busy intersections, you want to do it once and do it right the first time. That's all I wanted to add. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, you never want to do the Frogger twice into the intersection. That does bring up a good point too. Quickly, I'm sorry, I'm going to take a side tangent here. I guess when y'all elected me unofficially to be the MC, I'm allowed to do that. It was mentioned earlier in the presentation that sometimes NGS monument data sheets are actually off. So I got to thinking real quick, and that is so true, and we see it a lot. It's a lot of work to keep these updated, but the Earth moves. And so as the Earth's moving, these data sheets, they're not necessarily moving at the same time. So even take a pause if it's coming from the government, and make sure that it's correct as well. Because if you're setting up on that location, you want to hit it right the first time. Make sure you're shooting that in. I guess the other thing with that being said, there's a follow-up question about datums. And I'll throw this back at Paige. Paige, I'm assuming, again, ProStar has all the datums, and I'm assuming as well you're tracking NatRef 2022, so the new North American datum that's coming out. That's maybe talked about that real quick.
So some of these questions, I'll admit, may be a little bit over my head, no pun intended. But yeah, we keep up on all of the changes, not just based on the datums, but based on all the equipment changes. I mean, this world constantly is evolving. And anytime anything new evolves or changes or comes out, then as your system has to be designed where it can easily and seamlessly, integrate. And everything is moving to, open source anyway. So almost anything that changes in this world now is pretty much open source. And if your system is designed to accept, open source, including datums, then it's pretty much plug and play now.
Perfect. That's great. I'm going to throw you under the bus one more time, Paige. There's a question. Does this technology only work on pipe with tracer wire? So this is probably a better question for a utility locator company, but could you maybe talk about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So obviously the way that the locate devices work is they have to pick up a currency or a frequency. And if you do on PVC, for example, there is no currency and frequency because it's plastic, right? So generally you should have a tracer wire on it, but those tracer wires are often severed. And as soon as they're severed, then they're pretty much useless, right? So when it comes down to detecting plastic pipe, then you have limitations using these electromagnetic cable and pipe locating devices. But there are other technologies that are out now that we also, again, integrate into. So, for example, GPR, ground penetrating radar, doesn't work everywhere, but it does have the ability to identify, anomalies in the ground. And so if you know roughly in the area that there's a 3-inch PVC pipe, it'll detect it. And those technologies continue to advance and become better and better and better, where you can actually identify in 3D that there's something down there. Obviously, it won't tell you what it is. But we're also working with another company that has developed a gyroscope that's about the size of my pen that will fit in any utility as long as it's about 1.5 inches in diameter. So you could actually put it into a PVC pipe even while there's gas in the line, and it'll map the asset down to the centimeter because you integrate it obviously with high precision GPS. And then it'll also measure the bend and the radius. So it's great for gas because it's PVC, but also for conduit before you pull the fiber through. So the technologies are here to get around instances where the asset might not be detectable by standard devices.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have two more questions. I know we're sort of at the end of our time. I would like to ask if anybody out there, hang tight. We've got two more questions, and these are both really neat questions, but we will be wrapping up shortly. Just a friendly reminder that we will be posting this video afterwards, or please reach out to Paige, Rodney, Larry, myself, connect me. We'd love to follow up with you. With that, if you could, I believe we have one more poll as well. Maybe we can throw that up while we are answering these last questions live. Okay, so we got two more questions. Let's do it. And I want to stay with technology, and then we'll go kind of more towards policy and decision making. The first question is asking about this technology, hardware, software being utilized in third world countries or developing countries, considering the cost of setup and maintenance. Paige, if you don't mind starting, maybe Larry follow up. What does international look for like to ProStar, and then same for you, Larry?
So the way we architected and designed the system is to work literally anywhere in the world. Again, if plug and play today, we're already working in other parts of the world. And of course, we're reliant also on the equipment manufacturers, including, Bad Elf, the companies that develop the GPS and the GNSS receivers and the EM locate devices, but the majority of them also have a global, footprint around the world. And I would actually say that the value that we provide in third world countries might even be far greater than what it is, say, for example, in more modernized areas like, the United States or Australia or Europe, because in most cases, they don't have any records on where their utilities and pipelines are located. So they're basically, doing any type of construction in the dark, and they don't have, the same type of regulatory bodies that we have here as well. It's kind of like what I said 50 to 100 years ago. No one was really concerned about where these utilities and pipelines are being placed. But obviously today there's implications as a result of that. So if you go back to these, countries that are less developed than, say, for the United States, then the problem is the same there that it was here, 50 years ago. So I think it's even more important in those countries that they utilize these type of technologies, which, by the way, are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And again, not to throw, a curveball at the companies that develop the GPS receivers, but even if you were just out collecting where the utility was located, utilizing the GPS receiver that's in your mobile device, which doesn't matter what part of the country or world you're in, almost everybody has a mobile device, right? It'll seamlessly pair to the utility locating device. At least you're getting a geospatial point and reference of where that utility is and what type of utility it is, even if it's only accurate to, say, 3 to 5 meters. And then you can always go back and recollect it and then rectify the location.
Love it.
So the point being is that, cost is definitely not a barrier.
That's great. What about you, Larry? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so actually, I guess I could kind of piggyback on that. The reality is, GNSS receivers, as Paige mentioned, they'll work anyway, whether it's a phone or an external receiver. The challenge really becomes, on the accuracy side of the fence. In the developed nations, there's a lot of technologies available to support higher accuracy that require, a considerable amount of infrastructure, at least a minimal amount of infrastructure. As you start getting into very remote areas or, undeveloped nations, that infrastructure doesn't generally exist. So there's techniques to mitigate that. There are options to, augment the systems that may or may not exist. You mentioned, the base rover methodology would be one of them. That actually works quite well when you're in an area that doesn't have the reference systems that we have in our nation. But the reality is you are going to get higher accuracy, or there are mechanisms to get it. It's just the techniques might be a little bit different.
That's great. I know we I've heard this term kind of being tossed around, but the democratization, of GPS or GIS data collection. It's no longer do you have to spend tens of thousands of dollars on the equipment. No longer do you have to spend tens of thousands of dollars on the application and the software. So I think the world has changed and it's getting more affordable and easier to access for most people out there. Okay, so one more question, and then I think that about wraps it up. And this time we're going to be talking a little bit about funding. This one says, are you familiar with using ARPA funds for infrastructure mapping projects for small communities? Any thoughts out there from any of the participants on funding, especially for smaller communities? Rodney, do you have something here?
Yeah, that kind of crosses the line into the area where I can't really talk about in this kind of a forum. If you have specific things that the questionnaire wants to have answered, I can answer that in an offline setting. But it's because there's over 3,700 different programs in some fashion and form across all the 237 different agencies. I'm not going to know the details, especially even AARPA and all the rest. And those cycles are funded various on the calendar. So if they have a specific ask and they have a specific thing that they're looking for, I don't mind looking at it and getting back to them. It might take me a little bit because I'm under some time crunches as well. But it's dependent. It's very program dependent. Reach out to the advocates. Make sure you get the grants manager person on your side, because that is one of the key things, is understanding what the grants details are going to be. Is there a match involved? Some places require a PPC, especially in public-private partnerships. A match is involved. You got to have some skin in the game. So that's where I would start, is really reading the details of what the RFA request for qualifications are. Say, asking
Rodney,
for.
I don't want to read stuff. God.
Oh, come on, man.
I know. Reading. That's so
like
last
that money,
century.
don't you? You like that money.
What about you, Paige? Any thoughts on funding?
There is funding that's available, as Rodney alluded to. It just depends on which branch that you're working with, but especially with the new infrastructure bill, which for small municipalities and rural areas is focused on expanding their broadband network. They know that there's concerns about mitigating the amount of damages that could be incurred as a result of all this of this construction. So there is funding that is available. Which particular branch? I could actually provide that information. I have to do a little digging, but yes, there is funding available.
Larry, any other thoughts?
Yeah, from my perspective, this is something that in the geospatial community we talk about a lot. Some state agencies have resources for the smaller towns and municipalities, for example, to help with the process, because in general it's a grant writing process, and so you need to understand the grant writing process. You need to figure out who the funding agency is and what they want, because they're going to have their own specifications and requirements to be able to even request any of these monies. And there's some compliance needs as well that flow down, which might have implications for the township or municipality in accepting the money. So what are the responsibilities that you might have with taking the money and actually putting the infrastructure in place? So it is a very complex topic. I'm actually hoping we'll be able to do more events that actually go into greater detail on this. But like Rodney mentioned, there's a lot of agencies and a lot of differences in the world, and there isn't really a one size fits all to get at the money. So probably start with your state agency and see if they have a program to help the smaller townships and municipalities.
All right, that is amazing. We're going to wrap it up here. I'm going to say thank you to the Connect Me folks for putting this amazing event on, and thank you everybody for attending. In the chat, there's some information. You can do some follow-up. I'd like to do a final thought, a one-word, one-liner, something to leave us each with. Paige, what you got?
Transformation. It's here. So recognize it and accept it, and get ready for it.
I'm ready. Transformation. Rodney?
Change. Change is the only thing that is constant, and it's every day, all the time. We can't control it. We can't fight it. We have to be able to change with the times. And as things continue to change, we need to make sure that we are doing the best we can to keep up with it, or even be the trendsetter and set that new change going forward.
We work together, change isn't that scary. And Larry, final thought?
Okay, mine's 2 words, but it has a hyphen in the middle. It's digital twin. We are at a stage in technology where that's not only a requirement, it's essential. For not just having an adequate representation of our infrastructure, for all the reasons Paige mentioned, from a safety perspective, from a management of infrastructure going forward, getting away from paper records is essential. And the tribal knowledge that might walk out the door. Cities need to be able to manage their infrastructure and plan for the future. And the digital twin is going to be the way that that's going to happen.
Not much to say after that. I just want to say thank you to you all for coming, spending time with us today. Thank you for our presenters. Again, thank you, Connect Me, and we'll make sure to get this recording out soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.